Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Becky Marcy, and I'm with the Systems Forecasting and Trends Office here at the Florida Department of Transportation. We are excited for all of you to be joining us on our first webinar of 2025. So today we're examining the trends in transportation and economics and how they are interrelated. I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items for audience participation. This is a Teams webinar, so you are automatically muted, but please feel free to add questions into the chat. We have reserved a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A, and we'll kind of pick from those as we give them to our panelists today. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website shortly after the event. We are offering professional development credits. So for engineers and planners who are participating today in the live session, you will be eligible for 1 hour of credit. FDOT staff can download their certificates through our Learning Curve application, and anyone outside of our FDOT organization will get those certificates emailed to them. So today's speakers are really excited to welcome Katie Yetter and Kim Holland today. We are very fortunate to have them share their expertise with us. So Katie serves as the president of the Florida Chamber Leadership Cabinet on Safety, Health, and Sustainability. Her dual focus perspective as a leader promotes member education and spearheads action to achieve enterprise results. Katie's drive to envision and actualize new possibilities to fuel organizational growth and continuous improvement has remained a constant through her career and life. Katie has spearheaded bold new initiatives that have led to year after year record-breaking revenue results while expanding the Chamber's ability to help make Florida one of the nation's safest, healthiest, and most sustainable states. She leads internal operations and strategic planning for a parent organization of 17 profit and nonprofit entities, including the Safety Council, the Health Council, and the Sustainability Council. Katie oversees financial management, revenue generation, accounting, and human resources across the Florida Chamber. So we're really excited to have her here today. And then we have Assistant Secretary of Strategic Development for the Florida Department of Transportation, Kim Holland. Kim has 30 years of diverse infrastructure engineering experience, and she joined FDOT team in 2023 as the Assistant Secretary of Strategic Development. She is responsible for strategic investments into Florida's transportation system, including the Strategic Intermodal System. Her responsibilities include ensuring that Florida remains the leader in supply chain logistics in the country, maximizing strategic funding through competitive grant opportunities for Florida's communities, creating strong partnerships with businesses and ports to maintain one of the nation's strongest economies as Florida remains a destination for many, and developing and implementing strategies to make sure Florida remains resilient to extreme weather while protecting our infrastructure investments. So we have two great speakers today, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Katie, who is going to share some of Florida's economic trends.
Thank you so much, Becky. It's an honor to be here. I've very much enjoyed working with the Florida Department of Transportation and especially Assistant Secretary Holland. Next slide. So the Florida Chamber of Commerce several years ago put several $1 million into what we call the Florida 2030 Blueprint. Assistant Secretary Holland was very involved, and her leadership was instrumental in bringing the 2030 Blueprint to life for the Florida Chamber Foundation. So this report is really meant to bring 6 pillars to life and 39 goals. The 6 pillars go from talent, supply, and education all the way to quality of life and quality of places, and specifically one of those 6 pillars being infrastructure and growth leadership. The 2030 Blueprint is sort of our guiding light on how we're uniting Florida's business community to secure Florida's future for good. And ultimately, if we achieve our 39 goals against all 6 of these pillars, we will in fact be the 10th largest economy in the world. Next slide. So we continue to align our work here at the Florida Chamber with the 2030 blueprint. Currently, we are the 16th largest economy in the world on our journey to becoming the 10th largest economy. Our metrics in this report are meant to adapt and to adjust, given that we are going to add 2.8 million net new residents, 1.45 million net new jobs, 40 million more annual visitors, and 2.5 million more drivers in the state of Florida. So aligning these metrics, these outcomes, and the research that our foundation does under the leadership of Dr. Keith Richard will continue to make sure that the right things are happening for Florida, especially as it pertains to our infrastructure outcomes that we need. Next slide. All of this, Ken, our 39 goals, we're data focused and research focused here at the Florida Chamber. So all of this information is housed on thefloridascorecard.org. You can actually take all of this down even to your local county level to look at those 39 goals at a community county level. So here I've shown just some basics for the state of Florida as a whole. We see the 1.5 million net new jobs are needed by 2030. We've had open jobs decrease to 387,000. Unemployment rate at 3.4, which has really been unchanged from November of 2024. Housing sales a little over 20,000, which is just single family home sales. So but that number does not include our condo sales or anything outside of single family homes. And housing starts really speaks to building permits that have been approved and that housing builds are going to start on. But again, that is only going to pertain to single family home sales. Next slide. Sharing some of our infrastructure and growth leadership, we also, under our infrastructure and growth leadership pillar, have shared some of our scorecard tiles here. So you can see we have seaport cargo that we're tracking, currently declining, medium rents, high-speed communications, etc. But we'll get a little bit more into the details behind that in just a minute. So as we look at Florida's changing demographics, we are going to add about 2.8 million people into the state of Florida. So on the left there, you can see our top projected increases being number one, Miami-Dade, adding 368,000 people. So of those 2.8 million people that are going to be moving into Florida, the top 5 counties there account for 52.5% of those 2.8 million people. 82.4% of those 2.8 million people are going to be coming into those top 10 counties. If you look over to the right, we show the top growth rate. So those are smaller counties, but the percentage of people that are going to be moving into those counties are some of the top growth rates that we're going to see in the state of Florida. So given our Florida's changing demographics, it's going to present unique challenges, both from increases in counties as well as top growth rates in some of the smaller counties across Florida. Next slide. So as we look at overall migration trends, this is a recent report that the Florida Chamber Foundation put out to really look at the migration trends that are happening in Florida. So since the Florida Chamber 2030 blueprint was launched in 2018, Florida saw 2.17 million net new residents, which was the second highest in the nation. But growth has been shifting and it's been slowing somewhat. So what is the driving causes behind that? So we have had the second highest net migration in the country in 2023, which was 126,000. So we saw the highest inflow into the state of Florida. We had, however, the second highest outflow from the state of Florida, only second behind California. What we're seeing is ages 20 to 29-year-olds are leaving at a high rate. And the top 2 reasons for leaving are housing costs and job opportunities outside the state of Florida. If we look a little bit further into Florida's aging population is contributing to the workforce struggles that we're having. So we're seeing a population decline for ages 9 and under, as well as ages 25 to 35 and ages 50 to 60. And why this age demographic is a big deal is that is a lot of our new talent, as well as the top GDP contributors. So a lot of the new talent, of course, is going to be ages 25 to 35 and top GDP contributors in those ages of 50 to 60. Next slide. So we saw the largest outflow in the age group of 20 to 29-year-olds, the largest inflow being the age group of 60 to 69-year-olds. So overall, the trend reveals the shrinking of Florida's age group from 25 to 35-year-old population. We are the #1 state for net income migration into the state of Florida. So you're bringing people into the state of Florida that are bringing with their home sales from other states, high home equities, higher earnings from other states into the state of Florida. So we are seeing the state move more towards a shift of wealthy population, which is contributing to some of the home ownership pricing and affordability that we see as one of the reasons for net out migration in the state of Florida. Next slide. Over the past 12 months, we have been creating jobs that create the infrastructure here in Florida. So you see from December 2023 to December 2024, the total jobs created 147,900, 28,900 of that was in the construction industry. So we are seeing that we are growing jobs to create the infrastructure and the housing over the past 12 months. That should help understand what some of these trends and pricing constraints are doing in the state of Florida. Next slide. We've also been doing a lot of work on skills, on the skills gaps report. So for every 100 open jobs in the state of Florida, 98 Floridians are looking for work. So recently, the Florida Chamber Foundation has done a report on skills gap and what are the open jobs and what are the people available and what are the skills that are available. The other thing that we're looking at are the right people living in the right areas and communities that match with the skills that are available in those community areas. So overall, on the scorecard tile, we see we have open jobs of 387,000 jobs, which is declining, 377,000 unemployed people. And that's an overall sort of state number. If we look down at the county level, it does fluctuate per county. So Palm Beach County, we have 76 unemployed people seeking work for every 100 jobs. In the Glades County, we have 407 unemployed people seeking work for every 100 open jobs. So you do see fluctuation on county when we look across the broad state of Florida and how this is impacted down to the community level. Next slide. So when we look at affording housability, we see in the middle there, that is sort of pre-pandemic. Median listing price was at its highest when active listings were at their lowest. And if we look out to December of 2024, we've seen that we've got active listings that have sort of recovered to pre-pandemic levels from December of 2018. The part on the blue, though, the median listing price has not declined in proportion to the active listings that have rebounded to pre-pandemic listings. So our median listing price is $432,000. That does include single-family homes, townhomes, and condos as well. Our median rents are about $1,500, which is 54.9% of Floridians have a housing cost burden when you look against medium income. Next slide. So Florida's median rents is among the highest in the nation. We're actually the 12th highest in the country. So we see our median rent is a little over $1,500. January 2019, we were pretty in line with the nation. And as we look at October 2024, our median has significantly increased over the national median of $1,300 for median rents in the state of Florida. Next slide. Over the last 12 months, we have added a little over 53,000 business formations in the state of Florida. So we do lead the nation in business formations. So we're a little over 8,400 over California, 12,000 over Texas, and 28,000 over the state of New York. Next slide. So we have a full research team here at the Florida Chamber Foundation. And so every year in January, we release what we call Florida's economic forecasts. And so actually this afternoon, and what we're going to drop into the chat, this afternoon, we're going to be issuing our press release on what our economic forecasts are for 2025. So that's going to be dropped into the chat. So everybody joining us on this call today has a preview to what our 2025 economic forecasts are for the state of Florida. So the numbers that we have in bold in the middle of this slide were the predictions that the team made in January of 2024. The bubbles here out to the side are updates as we've been tracking this throughout the year on how accurate some of our predictions have been. So we predicted about 1 to 1.5% Florida annual job growth. As through December 2024, we're at about 1.6. So very excited to see what we're doing in 2025, and that has been dropped into the link as well. Next slide. So as we work with Assistant Secretary Holland and the Florida Department of Transportation, we continue to work against another report the Florida Chamber Foundation has brought to life, which is the Florida Trade and Logistics 2030. And this specifically does a deep dive on our pillar around infrastructure and growth leadership. So we continue to align our goals and our outcomes on what needs to happen from an infrastructure standpoint on this research. Next slide. And on our infrastructure coalition calls, this report, our trade and logistics report, is what is the foundation of that work and what happens on our infrastructure coalition here at the Florida Chamber. Our policy director, Colton, runs the infrastructure coalition, is really working to move the goals and the outcomes that we need to see happen as outlined in the report. Our former chair of the Infrastructure Coalition, Nath Prasad, who is the former president of the Florida Transportation Builders Association. So with that, we would love everybody engaged in the work, our solution summits, as we align our data and our research for the right outcomes to happen in the state of Florida. And here I've just shared some of these solution summits that we have coming up here through 2025. So really hope that you engage in on this work and we come together to make sure that the right things happen in the state of Florida. So with that, thank you all so much for the opportunity to share some of the work and the data and the insights that we are working on here at the Florida Chamber. So with that, Becky, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Katie. That is a wealth of information. And we have added links to all of the various documents that Katie mentioned throughout her presentation. Those are in the chat. And just want to remind everybody to feel free to put questions in the chat. We are monitoring those. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Assistant Secretary Kim Holland.
Thanks so much, Becky. And I truly appreciate everybody joining us this morning. I do want to just take a pause before I begin my portion of today's presentation and really recognize the great and the strong work of Katie and the Florida Chamber team. Something that is so incredibly unique to our Florida Chamber is really that research and that economic analysis that is so incredibly insightful. And I'll share with you, and Katie actually said it, there's a lot of information that she spoke about today that is truly hot off the press. The fact that we're #1 in business formations is really a testament to the success of the Chamber in working with our businesses and really driving forward the economic growth of the state of Florida. So I'm so proud to have all of those statistics shared with you today. And I'm also very proud of my former relationship with the Chamber, but then also our partnerships with the DOT going forward. So we'll go to the next slide. Something that I do want to also touch on is FDOT's mission. Transportation is really about that economic development in our communities. It is a core part of our mission. And you can also see our mission is also to provide a transportation system that's really supporting that economic competitiveness, and it's preserving our community's quality of life. Tremendously important to us, and you're going to hear more about that in my other slides. Next slide. So something that is taking place right now, we are planning for our transportation future. It is really just an integral part of our long range and our strategic investment process. So what you see here, the policy guidance and the overarching plan that's really laying the foundation and really serves as the blueprint of our future investments, that is our Florida Transportation Plan. It really is that long range vision that's guiding the 30-year transportation future. And we want it to reflect our community's visions and our goals. So this plan is updated every 5 years. It's an extraordinarily collaborative effort. And that collaboration takes place at both the state, the regional, and with our local transportation partners. Now, I'll share with you the development of the FTP. It's guided in a couple of different ways. It's guided through an executive steering committee. We've got numerous focus groups and tremendous comprehensive community engagement. And I'm really proud, Katie is an incredible member of that FTP Executive Steering Committee, and her insight and her connection is helping to strengthen our alignment. We continue to be focused on that economic vision. And I'll also share with you, we do have a very long history of developing these strategic plans. The one that I'm talking about is planning our 2055 future. And what you see on the screen are the goals that we have solidified. And again, working to really connect between transportation and what that tether is to the state's economic connectiveness. So later, I'm gonna give you a couple pointers on how you can be involved, because this is really your opportunity to have your voice be heard. So stay tuned as I share a little bit more about that. So we're going to go to the next slide. So Katie shared how Florida is continuing to grow. Florida is an amazing state. We have a multitude of opportunities. We are seeing growth with our new residents. We're seeing job growth, and we're also seeing growth with just visitors coming to enjoy our great state. This also equates to increased transportation demand. So we're certainly seeing more trips on our system. And what you see in this chart, it's really showing that increase in the daily vehicle miles traveled. And you can see what that trend has been over the years. We're seeing an intensity of the trips also growing over the next 30 years. So in 2050, those projected travel patterns, we're going to see them be more intensive. But then congestion relief is really going to be a priority for us, certainly in those urbanized areas. And you're really going to see that focus in Central Florida and also in Southeast Florida. Next slide. So as Florida is continuing to grow both in our population and in our economic output, we're going to continue to see that increase in demand on travel, but also in our movement of goods. So daily vehicle miles traveled, that's one measure of those demands. What this graph is showing you, trends very similar to Florida's gross domestic product. So that's our GDP growth. And also FDOT is focused on providing that quality transportation system for our residents and our workers and our visitors. Now, we want to make sure we're also focused on making sure those goods are arriving on time, and our supply chain is connected to that. That's how we're supporting to provide also those job opportunities and strengthening that economic growth and output. Now, transportation not only enables the state's economic function, but it's that transportation industry itself that's helping to contribute directly to that Florida economic output. So out of Florida's total GDP, the transportation sector, believe it or not, makes up 24% of that. and it's generated over $380 billion in 2023, which is just an amazing statistic. Now, if we go to the next slide, we want to continue to recognize the importance of transportation. And I think it's important to note the Florida legislature has over time continued to increase funding and transportation. So what you see here is an increase by 118% over the last 7 years. So while the 2025 fiscal year, and that's our tentative number, we're on track to have record investments in Florida's work program. Now, I want to share with you when it comes to our investments, something that's very, very unique to the state of Florida. When you look nationally, something that we have that's so important, we have a focus on an investment structure that's our strategic intermodal system. So, what is that? That is one of our high priority networks of transportation infrastructure that's really driving the state's economic growth. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that became unique to us. So, back in 2003, the governor and the legislature established that SIS program. It has been one of the most significant programs to supporting our transportation facilities, and it supports interregional, interstate, and also international travel. So I want to dig into a little bit of what I just mentioned. So we're seeing those increases in FDOT's work program and how it's equating to those investments in our transportation future. Interestingly, we have a statutory requirement to complete a macroeconomic study. It was just completed in December of this year. And I think what's important to note, for every dollar that we spend, and this is looking from 2024 to our 2028 transportation work program, it is yielding roughly a 4.26 return in dollars. And that's being returned to our economy. Now, if I move to the next slide, so what this map represents is our strategic intermodal system facilities. Now this isn't all of our facilities in Florida, but these are ones that have met that statutory requirement within the SIS. So these SIS facilities do a couple of different things, and I want to just make note. So not only does it support, say, our roads and bridges, but it's serving 99% of our passenger enplanements and air cargo. It's serving 89% of our interregional bus and rail passengers. It's serving 100% of our rail and waterborne freight tonnage, and also our cruise ship passengers, and 55% of all vehicle traffic on the state highways, and 70% of truck traffic on state highways. So what you're seeing is those key investments in these facilities are just a truly critical component to the continued economic growth of the state of Florida. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our integrated transportation system, and it's making up several different things. It's our corridors, it's our hubs, it's our connectors, and it's how all of those modes are functioning together. And that's, again, so critical for the movement of not only our people, but also our goods. So FDOT, we are working with our partners through those very crucial multimodal investments, because we want to continue to meet the growing needs of Florida's population and economy. So in the next couple slides, I'm going to walk you through some examples of trends that are being reflected in the modes, and also further some examples of just some really important strategic investments. So we're going to start off with aviation. And what you might see if you've just experienced some air travel, our airports, they're getting busier. In 2023, we welcomed 105 million passengers. And from 2016, that was actually a 24 million increase in our passenger movements. In addition to moving people, we're also seeing those increases in tonnage. So we saw an increase of from 2.6 million tons in 2016 to 3.4 million tons of cargo transported through our airports in 2023. Now, what I'd also like to do is move to just a really important project highlight. Florida is working hard to stay on top of those investments in aviation infrastructure. And in 2022, the Orlando airport opened in an incredibly innovative and state-of-the-art terminal. It houses 1.2 million square feet, and it overall was a $2.8 billion investment. And what we're going to see is an expansion in the ability to accommodate an additional 12 million passengers yearly. And we're also seeing increasing the overall airport capacity to 60 million annual passengers. It's super important to note in 2023, the Orlando International Airport was our busiest airport in the state for those number of passengers. So I'm going to move on to spaceports. So something that I think is, again, just so incredibly unique to the state of Florida is that our DOT makes investments in space. In 1999, Florida law designated space travel as an official mode of transportation. And when we're thinking about space, and you look at space, you know, whether it's from different states, nationally or international, we're not necessarily in a competition, say, with Texas. We're not necessarily, you know, in a competition with our, you know, space providers. We're actually in a global competition, and I think that's an important note. Our space industry attracts 2.2 billion in private investments each year, and it's also supporting 4,900 high-paying jobs. The other thing that I think is super important to share with you, last year, the state legislature added 2 new space territories to Florida. So that included the Tyndall Air Force Base, but also the Homestead Air Reserve Base. So you might be wondering, what does that mean? What's a spaceport territory? It's an official designation that expands the financial opportunities for growth in that area to include and expand the aerospace operations. So this new spaceport territory reflects the state of Florida's vision for space as a mode of transportation, and it's truly expanding Florida as our ability to be a leader in the space industry. So again, I want to share with you some additional statistics in how we're making investments. So in 2017, it felt like we saw space launch and the number of launches just soar. And in 2017, we saw 19 launches. Last year, and I'll share with you, as we were getting into December, that was probably the number one question that I was answering is, what's our launch count? What's our launch count? And we saw launches go all the way through the whole month, and we saw a record of 93 launches. And so when you look forward and you're saying what's to come, we're expecting 150 launches to take place here in Florida. So as I said, space is a global competition. In 2024, so just last year, I shared we had 93 launches. Russia had 17 launches. China had 68 launches. In the whole United States, there were 158 launches. And Florida really captured 1/3 of that global market. So, according to a report that was published by Space Florida in 2023, over the next 5 years, the economic impact of that is expected to exceed $5.3 billion. So if we move on to our next slide, I'm gonna talk about ports. I'm so incredibly proud. Florida is home to 16 seaports, and combined, those ports generate $195 billion of overall economic value, and it supports 1.2 million jobs. Now, the cruise industry has been so integral to Florida's economic competitiveness, and that's been going on for several decades. Now, in fact, you may not know, but Florida is home to the 3 largest cruise ports in the world. So that includes Port Miami, Port Canaveral, and also Port Everglades. And in 2023, Florida seaports reached a record high of 19.4 million cruise passengers. And that amazingly accounts for 43% of all US cruise passenger movements. So in 2023, cruise operations at Florida seaports that generated $19.8 billion in economic value, which is just incredible. Next slide. So what we're seeing in the cruise business, not just those increasing volumes of our passenger movements, but it's prompted this interesting growth in cruise sizes. And this has actually, in turn, required Florida to continue to invest in expanding and improving our seaports. I love this graph. This graph shows that dramatic growth in the size of the cruise ships, and the graph almost can't keep up. There's so many new ones that are just coming into the market. Since 1990 until 2000, interestingly, most of the cruise ships were built in that 70,000, 80,000 gross ton range. So from 2015 until today, that average gross tonnage of that new cruise ship, it's over 170,000. So that's actually more than twice the size of the ships that were built during that 1990 era that I was just talking about. Now, if we go on and move to cargo. So Florida seaports are also continuing to serve as a major gateway for our imports and our exports. And they truly do support our economy through 107 billion in international trade. Our ports process 97%, which is roughly 68 billion of international imports, and also 96%, which is 41 billion of international exports that are just coming through Florida. So that total tonnage across all of Florida's seaports in 2023, incredibly, it reached a new record high of 114 million tons of cargo. So here's a couple of statistics that I want to share with you. 5 of Florida seaports fell within the top 30 containerized cargo ports, and that's in the nation. So Jacksport came in at number 5. Port Miami came in at number 6. Everglades following in the number 16 spot. Port of Palm Beach at 23, and then Tampa Bay rounding off the list at number 30. So moving on, and let's give an example of where some of our seaport investments are going. And we want to continue to upgrade the berths, and we want to continue to accommodate those increases in operation. Interestingly, one of Florida's fastest growing seaports is Port Manatee. And Port Manatee is adding 2.3 billion annually in that local economic impact. That accelerated growth, it is resulting in wear and tear on the facilities. And so it's necessary that we're making those upgrades to support the seaports. And we want to keep them as major players in our state to help us do a couple of different things. So it's to support in the supply of our construction materials. Those construction materials include cement, granite, limestone, and other aggregates. And so there's important investments being made at Port Manatee to upgrade and also reconstruct their berth 4. We want to really maximize the port's operating capacity and support in extending the lives of not only berth 4, but also berth 5. So I'm going to move on and let's talk about rail. Rail is truly another important mode that's supporting the movement of goods and also people. And we have a truly extensive system in the state of Florida. You may not know, but we have over 3,800 miles of rail track and 2,700 miles of mainline track that's connecting those major cities and regions. And so, to ensure the continued efficiency of our rail supply chains and in the movement of our people, we work with so many just exceptional partners in the state. If we're looking at our private railroads, we have 3 Class 1 rail, 1 Class 2, and 14 Class 3 or short line railroads. We also work with our 2 commuter rail lines, Sunrail, and also Tri-Rail. We also partner with Amtrak and Brightline. Those are 2 intercity passenger rails. And we also continue to work with numerous other stakeholders and organizations. So what I want to do is talk about our commuter rail services, and we'll move to the next slide. So again, this is something that's so incredibly unique to the state of Florida in that we do have legislation that allows us to acquire, operate, and maintain rail systems. And I'm going to talk about what those 2 systems are here. So Sunrail, FDOT designed and constructed that Sunrail commuter system starting back in 2014. I am so proud because we just celebrated 10 years of operation. And we actually had over 1 million riders last year. We hit an incredibly new milestone. This system operates over 61 miles, and there are 17 stations in both Volusia, Seminole, Orange, and Osceola counties. Sunrail has continued to expand its operations and make those important connections along those Central Florida communities. I'm so happy to share our most recent expansion with the Phase 2 North. So this is the DeLand station that just opened in the summer of 2024. And Since that, ridership has grown from opening day to December 31st. Just that DeLand station alone welcomed over almost actually 18,000 riders, which if you have not been on Sunrail, you need to ride it. It is an incredible and just wonderful mode of transportation for us. Tri-Rail is also a system that's operated by the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority, and that's a commuter rail service that connects Miami and Fort Lauderdale and also West Palm Beach. That service began back in 1989. So that's a system that's operated by SFRC, but it's owned by FDOT. And we continue to make investments and expansions. And one recent expansion that's notable was a 9-mile extension known as the Downtown Miami Link. So this connection, it does provide passenger service at that Tri-Rail Metro Rail transfer station in downtown Miami. And so those investments in rail safety also continue to be a priority for us. We continue to make investments in projects that include crossing resurfacing. We're focused on technology enhancements such as positive train control and also things such as smart rail crossing monitoring. So as our ridership continues to grow, and we continue to work with those local partners, FDOT is making investments in projects that help us to safely expand and also continue to connect our communities. I'm going to move on to our different cargoes. So while cargo comes from airports and seaports and rail, believe it or not, and I think many of you know this, freight predominantly is moved by our trucking industry. So that number of daily combination truck miles on Florida's roadways, it's really steadily increased. In 2023, truck miles traveled increased approximately 8% from 2022. So investments in transportation corridors are critical to our freight movements, and they continue to be essential to helping to maintain our state's economic growth. One recent project that I want to share with you that's supporting the movement of freight, it's the I-4 Central Florida Truck Parking Project. So this project is going to add nearly 1,000 truck parking spaces, and that's going to take place across 4 different locations along our I-4 corridor in Central Florida. These spaces will be added to rest areas that are just really experiencing this high volume of traffic. That is a $300 million investment that is just so truly needed. Also, when you think about how are our strategic investments being guided, like how are we looking at freight movements? And it's truly guided by an important plan that's called FDOT's Freight and Mobility and Trade Plan. Now, this plan was recently updated and it addressed some different things such as our supply chain cargo flows, our impacts to e-commerce on freight infrastructure. And then that plan's strategy also addresses truck parking, what we consider to be the trade imbalance, and ongoing supply chain disruptions. So another example of a project that I want to highlight is a key critical freight movement project that's called the I-395 project, and it's down in the Miami-Dade area. Now, I-395, it's a major eastern and western connector, and it's not only serving those movements in Miami Beach, but also the port itself. So in this project, FDOT and the Miami-Dade Expressway Authority partnered to rebuild major areas, including building the new elevated east and westbound ramps that will provide that direct linkage between I-95 and also I-395. So over the last 5 years, Florida has seen growth just, and I've kind of talked about it in all of our transportation sectors. A couple notable things that I want to mention. We have seen the airline industry grow by 27%, adding nearly 60,000 jobs in 2023. Other sectors, such as our aerospace industry, they have added private transportation jobs, and we are continuing to see increases there as well. So, as we look at Florida's transportation through all of the various modes, I think one of the conclusions that we can draw is that our transportation investments are directly linked to the state's economy. So for Florida's healthy economy, we want to be driving those investments because it's helping our population, our employment, our tourism, and it's just driving what is behind a lot of that transportation demand. So FDOT and our local partners, we're working together to continue to make those strategic investments because we really want to be working to sustain and enhance our transportation system to just meet all of the growing needs that I've been talking about. So as I come to the close of some of the different pieces of information I've been sharing with you, I kind of started off that this is your opportunity to get involved. This is your opportunity to participate in shaping Florida's future. And I want to remind everyone of our 2055 Florida Transportation Plan that's really helping to guide our transportation future. And I think as I just shared, information that's important to you, knowing where we are as a state, understanding those trends, and knowing where that can take us is important information in developing our vision for the future. Planning for our future, there's some different questions that I think, you may want to be asking, which is, how can our transportation system, how can we continue to evolve it in a way that it's spurring that economic growth? What are some critical areas in our freight movements now, but also what do we need to be thinking about in the future? And then how is technology changing the way that we move? So this 2055 Florida Transportation Plan, the updates, it's underway. And we're working closely with our key stakeholders. We're working to solidify that vision and develop important policy guidelines to keep Florida moving. I want to invite you to participate in the development of the Florida Transportation Plan. There are two ways that you can get to it. You can use your phone and you can scan that QR code on the screen. And then you can also go to floridaftp.com and participate. Florida is such an incredibly dynamic state. I have had the opportunity to work nationally before joining the DOT, and I'll share with you, we have a truly world-class transportation system that's helping to drive Florida's economy. So with that, I want to thank you. And Becky, I think I'm going to hand it over to you to share a few more things with us.
Thank you, Kim. That was Really insightful. So we do have a little bit of time for some Q&A, and I know Katie has been active in the chat answering a bunch of questions, but I do want to take a few moments to ask those of her so she can maybe provide everyone with the answer if you haven't seen the chat. But we'll just take a few questions from the chat right now, if that's all right with Katie and Kim. All right. So, Katie, one of the first questions that came in was, are the business formations all totally new businesses or business owners moving into the state and reconstituting their businesses in Florida?
Yeah, it can be both. And so what we're really tracking is, incorporation paperwork that's been filed in the state of Florida. So it can be businesses that are moving into Florida, as well as startups that are sort of originating here in Florida as well. So that number is sort of a combination of both because we're pulling it from the source through the state of Florida.
Great. Um, You spoke about median income, but what about wages and the increase in cost of living? Are we increasing our wages to keep up with that?
So our medium household income is not keeping pace at the same rate as home price increases. So from 2019 to 2024, the median listing price for homes increased just under 34% in the state of Florida. And real median household incomes over that corresponding timeline only went up 5%.
So I think you kind of covered this a little bit, but if people wanted to get more info, like by at the county level, where would they get that information?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on one of the last questions, we were talking about the differences between how we measure single family homes and condos and townhomes. A really good place that we would encourage everyone to engage with us on is our monthly webcast that we do with one of our economists under the leadership of Dr. Keith Richards, who heads all of our research here, which is Florida by the Numbers. And the link is right there, and you can follow us on X and some of the social channels and watch that. And that's where we really break this down on a monthly basis onto the county level. If there's specific things that you're really interested in that really goes on a deeper level on county level, that's a specific data point that you're looking for, Becky, I welcome those questions, and I can certainly get them over to Dr. Richard and make sure everybody has the information that is most helpful to them.
Great, thank you. So Kim, we had a couple questions. I'm not sure if you're able to expand on this, but we had a question about the truck parking. And will the new spaces be equipped with shore power to eliminate diesel idling emissions? I don't know if you know anything about the specifics of that actual project.
I would love to talk a little bit more about truck parking. So something that I think has just, if we take a couple steps back, if we just look nationally and we look at the state of Florida, truck parking is actually a top critical issue. And it's been a top critical issue for a number of different reasons. We actually have seen in the state of Florida instances where our truckers are having to wait to make that delivery. They might be sitting on the shoulders, and we really have to provide a mechanism for them to park more safely, where they're not in traffic in that way. We want to continue to develop that workforce, provide areas where they are safe, areas where it's lighted. And so in our truck parking areas, we will have some additional facilities for them. And along I-4, we're going to have an additional 1,000 spaces that are added. I'll share with you, that is an incredible investment. $300 million to work to solve part of that problem in Central Florida. And something that's also, I would share with you, that's very unique here in the state, we actually have a truck parking program. That's unique to Florida because addressing this issue is so incredibly important to us. We do want to continue to have the facilities developed where we're accommodating the needs of that workforce and accommodate, different types of fueling that's going to be needed.
Great, thank you. Katie, I think you've answered this one, but I thought you might want to expand on it a little bit. In your data presentation about housing, there was a question about, are condos a significant housing element of Florida, and why was only SF home ownership evaluated presented, single family?
Yeah, so we had on two separate slides on our scorecard tiles on the floridascorecard.org. That was referencing that we only are tracking on the single family homes there. And I'll go back and sort of, understand fully why we're tracking specifically on the single family home side of that. The slide that I shared on medium listing prices and that when it showed sort of that graph over time did account for single family home pricing as well as condos and townhomes, which included all of those components because it is a significant part of the housing economy here in Florida.
Great, thank you. We have a couple other questions, a lot of questions about the links and stuff, and I will just say that we have been providing those in the chat, and all of the links to the various documents will be provided in a separate email that's following up. But I wanted to throw another question towards you, Kim, if that's all right. And this one's a little bit about innovation. And I know innovation and new technologies, all of that's tied to economic growth and development. So is there any information you can share a little bit more about how FDOT is helping to invest in some of these technologies?
One emerging mode that I do want to talk about that I didn't cover earlier in my slides is advanced air mobility. So interestingly, if you haven't heard about advanced air mobility, this is a revolutionary and new mode of transportation that is expected to reach $1 trillion by 2045. And so the Florida Department of Transportation really had the forward thinking perspective to begin our efforts back in 2021. So let me go back and just share. So advanced air mobility is a type of air travel that's supported by an aircraft that's called an eVTOL. And that stands for an electric vertical and takeoff aircraft. And these aircrafts are, purported to be quieter and more efficient in their travel. And they address a type of travel that is different than your normal commercial airliner. So it's more regional travel. So you might see one of these aircrafts take flight between, say, Miami and Fort Lauderdale, or say Tampa and St. Pete. So back in 2021, the Department of Transportation started an incredible working group, and we partnered with different types of stakeholders that included the manufacturers, the operators, folks that would be constructing those landing pads. We worked with universities and a lot of local officials and also the FAA. And so as part of our efforts, that group has converted over to an official advisory committee that includes 50 members. We actually just completed phase 1 of our implementation plan. So we have actually published a very important land use guidebook that's available to help our locals as they're making decisions about planning and also local land use zoning and things of that nature. I'll share with you that guidebook was published in September of this year. And in the first week of it being published, we know that 26 other states downloaded it. The partners that we're working with are sharing with us that Florida is really leading the effort to implement and integrate this new mode of transportation into Florida's just incredible network. And when you really look at Florida's history in aviation, we really want to maintain, what we have done and what we would like to do in the future. I had an incredible opportunity to participate in Florida's first demonstration flight. That took place in Tampa, not last year, but the year before. That's how far ahead of things that we actually are. And when our partners are talking to us about how they're working not just nationally but globally, Florida is really preparing to best take flight. Last year, we went through a series of tabletop exercises where we worked with different stakeholders. How would they go through the local process? How would they go through the state process? How would they go through the federal process? And then that was looking at flight not just on an existing airport application, but also off airport applications. Something that we're working on in this coming year is a pilot program. So how are we working with those early entrants into this new mode of transportation? So, Becky, I'll share with you, I'm going to be speaking with the legislature next week and presenting a lot of what I shared with you at the Senate Transportation Committee. That's how important this mode of emerging technology is to the state. So hopefully that sheds a little bit of light into that question.
Yeah, that was great. Um, which actually is a good segue to one of my questions for Katie. Your slide, Katie, had a lot of different upcoming events for the Florida Chamber. So did you want to expand on any of those at all and maybe talk about what may be of particular interest to the transportation community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for this, key audience here, December of each year is where we hold our growth and infrastructure summit. So we had that event this past December down in Central Florida. And so as we look sort of ahead, we don't have that actually listed on here as well yet, Becky, but we'll get that edited and I can share that with you that you can send it out. Assistant Secretary Holland actually presented at that event this past year. We actually also had Secretary Perdue present at our Future of Florida Forum, which is really our annual report out of our 6 pillars and 39 goals. So of all the different things that I shared today, each one of these solution summits, we call it, is really focused on a pillar of that blueprint. The culmination of all 6 pillars on our 39 goals is the Future of Florida Forum, which is going to be October 27th through 28th down in Orlando, Florida. And that will really talk about our infrastructure pillar along with all the rest. And then coming up in December of 2025 will be our infrastructure specific solution summit. So we'd love to have everybody engage with us further on these conversations.
Great, thank you. Um, this is another question. Kim, I think this one might be more in your wheelhouse, and maybe Katie might have some input as well. But there's a lot of question in the chat about transportation funding. And we know gas tax is one element of funding, but can you expand a little bit more on Florida's funding for transportation?
I would love to, and I'm so happy you brought that question up. I saw it in the chat, and I definitely wanted to answer this one. So one thing that I think is really important, and again, something that I had shared with the participants, I had an opportunity to work nationally before joining the DOT. And something that is so incredibly unique to the state of Florida is how healthy our state funding tends to be. You've got other states across the US that rely very heavily on federal sources. And, Katie shared in her slides just, how much growth we've had, how much business growth that we've had. And so when you look at FDOT's overall work program, which is one of the highest in the nation, it is a great place to work here. It is a great place to do business here. Believe it or not, the state of Florida relies on federal funding at only 25%, which we are one of the lowest because we have so much healthy state funding. 50% of our funding comes from state dollars, and the other 25% of that comes from toll revenues. So that money goes back into the important investments in our work program. What we ended up seeing recently was an additional influx of funding through our Moving Florida Forward projects. So there's another basic $7 billion price tag that's addressing 20 projects. And that's really helping to support that population growth and supporting in congestion relief. Now, something else that I want to share that's so incredibly unique to the state of Florida compared to other DOTs across the country, we do have investments in our other modes of transportation, and we have a legislation that allows us to make those funding investments. We do have a 4.5% tax that supports investments in aviation. And when I talk to aviation partners that work in other areas across the US, they're so grateful for that investment that we make. Interestingly, same with rail. You have some different rail services that are going to be operating in the near future in other parts of the United States. Those DOTs do not have legislation where they can even spend $1 in rail. And then again, I mentioned space, the fact that our DOT can make investments in space. Really, all of these investments are setting Florida up to be successful. And what we tend to see is a lot of folks will look at our model and work to make improvements in their own areas. We are continuing to track funds from the gas tax. And you will hear Secretary Perdue say, our needs are continuing to outpace what investments we have available. And what we're also seeing, we're working to address inflation and just those increases in project costs. So what that means is as we're building our 5-year work program and as we're looking ahead through our Florida Transportation Plan, as a state, it's so important for us to make the right priorities and really make those investments where we're going to bring the greatest return and value. So Becky, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. So I'm just going to do one more question for both you and Katie, and then we will, I have one more slide and we'll wrap it up today because this has been a lot of great information. I think everyone on the call has been excited. We have a lot of resources to share. But this one is a little bit about collaboration and partnerships, and it's kind of general. So, Kim, Katie, when we're talking about transportation, we're talking about economy. FDOT is a great partner with a lot of our locals, with our modes. So is there kind of a general thought that you wanted to share about how we partner and how we work with all of our modal partners and our locals to really keep the needle moving forward?
Katie, if you want to go first, I'll go after you.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Becky. The FDOT has been just an incredible partner of the Florida Chamber and the Florida Chamber Foundation. It's been a big privilege to work with Assistant Secretary Holland. She's been involved in our work. Even in her previous role and part of the leadership on bringing the 2030 blueprint to life. And so as we look at ways that we engage the business community throughout Florida, when we look at supply chain, logistics, the movement of goods and people, and then everything that we're doing with the private sector, we look at movement of goods on manufacturing, the ports, the airports, but it's also then the workforce. And so everything that we're looking at when it comes to the movement then of people is how are we being effective and efficient of moving people within the communities, outside the communities, and county to county, as we look at how we're able to provide that workforce into the private sector to ultimately drive the economy to the 10th largest economy in the world. So it's very connected. Everything's connected. No pun there intended on infrastructure. But it's been just a pleasure to work with the FDOT in the state of Florida as we try to figure out how we solve some of these systemic issues that we have in the most effective way that we possibly can, and all rooted in our research and our data through the foundation under the leadership of Dr. Keith Richard.
That's great. Thanks.
And I'll echo a lot of the things that Katie shared. Her experience and expertise being a part of our Florida transportation plan is really helping us map out Florida's future. When we look at, important collaborations and partnerships, the first thing that we really do need to talk about is our partnerships with our communities. If they are not, in alignment with different investments and different needs, and if their vision and their goals are not captured, we're not going to get very far. And so it's so incredibly important to have that partnership. I am really proud of the partnerships that we have with all of our modal stakeholders. If it wasn't for the partnerships we have with our colleges and our different, contractors and different experts in the field, we wouldn't be where we are today. It's so incredibly important that we continue to plan for Florida's future and really leave behind what this great state means to the next generation.
Well, that was a great way to end. So, with that, we'll just want to show the next slide. Just a reminder that the Florida Chamber and the Florida Department of Transportation, particularly our Systems Forecasting and Trends Office, we do try to pull all of that information together to provide those useful resources to our partners, to our public, so that we can make those informed planning decisions. So I just want to thank both of you today. Katie, Kim, this has been fantastic. We've got a lot of great feedback in the chat. So with that, I just want to say thank you for everyone for attending. We were really glad to have you be a part of our first webinar of 2025. And with that, just have a great weekend. Thank you.